Living on a ranch comes with its hard days, but I've always loved the simplicity of it. The early mornings, the sound of the animals, the endless sky stretching over acres of open land. This was my slice of peace. That's why the footprints caught me so off guard. It started one morning in early spring. I had just stepped out of the house with a mug of coffee, heading toward the livestock pen to check on the goats. Overnight rain had turned the dirt into soft mud, leaving perfect impressions of hooves and something else. Human footprints. Big ones. The kind you'd expect from a grown man wearing heavy boots. At first, I thought maybe one of the farmhands had come by late, but that didn't make sense. None of them would have a reason to be here after hours. Besides, the prints didn't lead to the barn or the fields. They circled the livestock pen in loops before veering off toward my front porch and then back to the woods. I didn't think too much of it that day. Ranch life isn't glamorous and weird things happen. Maybe it was a hunter who wandered onto the property, I reasoned, or a prank by the neighbor's kid, though he'd never been bold enough to come this far onto my land. The next morning, there were more footprints, fresh and just as large. They followed the same pattern, circling the pen, pausing at the porch, and then disappearing into the woods at the edge of the property. This time, I decided to follow them. It was quiet as I walked along the trail. The tracks led deep into the woods, farther than I usually ventured. But after about 100 yards, the footprints turned towards the road and disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept trying to make sense of it. Whoever was coming onto my property wasn't just passing through. They were watching. Maybe even waiting. After a week of this, I'd had enough. I wasn't about to let someone stalk around my home, especially when it started to feel like they were targeting me. So I grabbed my shotgun, a thermos of coffee, and a thick blanket and holed up in the barn. From there, I had a clear view of the livestock pen and the house. It was just after midnight when I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. My pulse quickened, and I peered through the barn slats, scanning the dim light of the yard. Sure enough, a figure emerged from the tree line, moving slowly toward the pen. I could barely make out the shape of a man wearing something dark. He paused at the edge of the pen, just like the tracks had suggested, and then turned toward the house. That's when I noticed a second figure. This one stayed at the edge of the woods, blending into the tree line. They weren't moving, just standing there like they were keeping watch. I tightened my grip on the shotgun. I couldn't just sit there and let this happen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I fired 2 warning shots into the air. The sound echoed across the ranch, shattering the stillness of the night. The figure near the pen froze, then spun toward the woods. For a moment, I thought they might run, but instead, a loud crack echoed, and a bullet slammed into the barn door a few feet from where I was crouched. I ducked instinctively, my heart hammering as another shot rang out. Splinters flew from the wooden wall, and I realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just trespassing anymore. These people were armed, and they weren't afraid to fire back. I stayed low, crawling to the other side of the barn where my truck was parked. My phone was in my jacket pocket, and I fumbled with it, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could barely focus on her words. I gave her my address and explained the situation in hushed whispers, praying the intruders wouldn't hear me. "They're armed," I whispered. "Please send someone quickly." She assured me that officers were on their way, but out here in the middle of nowhere, I knew it would take time. Too much time. The barn was pitch black, the only light coming from a sliver of moonlight sneaking through the cracks. I stayed hidden behind a stack of hay bales, straining to hear any movement. For a while, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard it. The creak of footsteps on the porch. They were at the house. I held my breath, every nerve on edge as I imagined them breaking in, rummaging through my things, or worse. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios, and I cursed myself for not installing security cameras sooner. Then another sound. The crunch of gravel, this time moving away. I peeked through a gap in the barn wall and saw the figures retreating toward the woods. One of them carried something in his hand, but I couldn't make out what it was. Every minute felt agonizingly long, and around 40 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights appeared at the end of my driveway. The sight was almost enough to make me cry with relief. I ran out to meet the officers, explaining everything as quickly as I could. They searched the property, but by then, the intruders were long gone. The officers found the same footprints I'd seen for days, along with shell casings near the tree line. One of them speculated it might have been poachers or thieves scouting the property. But I wasn't convinced. Why would they just watch for days before making a move? And what were they carrying when they left? Over the next few weeks, I installed floodlights and cameras around the property. The police promised to patrol the area more frequently, but I knew better than to rely on that. Out here, you're mostly on your own. The footprints never reappeared, but the memory of that night hasn't left me. Every time I step outside, I find myself looking toward the woods, expecting to see someone lurking at the edge of the trees. Whoever they were, they knew my property better than I did, and they weren't afraid to fight back. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my gut and stayed hidden in the barn. But the thought that they were willing to shoot at me on my own land still sends a shiver down my spine. Ranch life may be peaceful, but it's anything but predictable. As a crop farmer, my life is built on routines. Every morning, I'm out in the fields, checking the irrigation, inspecting the soil, and making sure everything is on track for harvest. It's hard work, but I love it. The farm has been in my family for generations, and there's a certain pride in maintaining it. This takes place back in 2016. I can still picture it as if it happened yesterday. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun was just coming up over the rows of corn that stretched as far as the eye could see. I'd brought my dog, Max, along. He's a good farm dog, always sticking close by and alerting me to anything unusual. We were walking the perimeter when Max froze, his nose twitching. He started barking, his deep, insistent bark that he only used when something wasn't right. "Calm down, boy," I said, patting his head. But then I saw it too. There, near the edge of the field, was a makeshift campsite. At first look, it didn't look like much. Just a patch of flattened grass and a circle of stones that had been used as a fire pit. But as I got closer, I noticed other things. There was a crumpled blanket, a few empty cans of food, and footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't Max's. Someone had been living here. I crouched down, examining the scene. The fire pit was cold, but the ashes looked fresh, like it had been used within the past day or two. The blanket was old and dirty, but it was carefully folded, almost like whoever left it planned to come back. The footprints were what really got to me. They weren't just random. They led from the campsite toward the farmhouse. Max was still barking, pacing back and forth like he was trying to tell me something. I decided to follow the footprints. They led across the field, through the tall grass, and stopped just shy of the back porch of my house. That's when I noticed something else. Scratches on the doorframe, like someone had tried to open it. I didn't know what to make of it. It could have been a drifter, someone passing through and looking for shelter. But why would they come so close to the house? Why not just stay in the field? The whole thing left me uneasy. That night, I locked every door and window and kept Max inside with me. I barely slept. Around midnight, Max started growling. I grabbed the flashlight from my bedside table and crept to the window. The yard was dark and still, but Max wouldn't stop growling, his body tense and his eyes fixed on the back porch. The next morning, I went back out to the campsite. It looked the same as before, except for one thing: the blanket was gone. Whoever had been there had come back during the night, and this only confirmed what I already thought. That must have been the reason why Max barked so much. Over the next few days, the signs kept piling up. I'd find fresh footprints around the house every morning, always leading to the same places: the back porch, the barn, and sometimes the window near the kitchen. I started feeling like I was being watched, like someone was out there waiting for the right moment to make a move. Then came the night Max went wild. It was around 2 a.m. when his barking jolted me awake. This wasn't his usual bark. This was frantic, almost panicked. I grabbed my rifle and a flashlight and headed downstairs, trying to quiet him down so I could hear what was going on. As soon as I opened the back door, Max bolted, tearing across the yard toward the fields. "Max!" I yelled, but he was gone, his barks echoing in the distance. I followed him as best I could with my flashlight. That's when I saw a figure running through the cornfield, their outline barely visible against the tall stalks. They were fast, weaving through the rows like they've done this multiple times. Max was chasing them, his barks growing fainter as they disappeared deeper into the field. I didn't go after them. Instead, I went back to the house and called the police. The police arrived about 30 minutes later. Just as they were stepping out of their vehicles, Max came trotting back, his tail wagging like he'd just accomplished something incredible. My relief at seeing him unharmed was short-lived when I noticed the blood. His mouth was smeared with it. He didn't seem hurt, though. If anything, he looked proud, like he'd done exactly what he was supposed to do. "Is he okay?" one of the officers asked, stepping closer to check him out. I shook my head. "I think so, but that's not his blood." I told them about the campsite, and the officers exchanged a look before heading toward it. Max followed them part of the way, wagging his tail and sniffing at the air, but he stayed close to me when I called him back. I stood near the edge of the cornfield, watching the beams of their flashlights sweep through the corn. It didn't take long for them to find something. One of the officers radioed back, his voice tense. "There's blood on the ground here. Looks fresh." "Any sign of the guy?" his partner asked. "Negative. No body, no trail, just blood." Hearing that sent a chill through me. I stared at Max, who was happily wagging his tail at my feet. What had he done out there? And where had they gone? Near the edge of the field where the footprints had been, the officers found a knife and a coil of rope. The knife was sharp, the kind you'd use for hunting or self-defense. The rope was thick and frayed, like it had been used before. "Looks like whoever this was had plans," one of the officers said. "You're lucky your dog scared them off." I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed. The police promised to patrol the area more frequently, but they didn't have much else to go on. They suggested I get a security system, maybe even some motion-activated lights, to deter anyone from coming back. I took their advice, installing cameras and lights around the house and barn. But even with the added security, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there. I haven't seen any signs of them since, but I know better than to let my guard down. Living on a farm, you get used to being alone, but there's a difference between solitude and isolation. And when you're isolated, it doesn't take much to feel vulnerable. To this day, I wonder what they wanted. Were they just looking for a place to stay, or did they have something worse in mind? I hope I never find out. When my friend Paul called me out of the blue to ask for a favor, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I'd been working freelance as a horse trainer for the past few years, and my schedule was flexible. Paul owned a modest farm a couple of hours away, and he needed someone to watch the place while he attended a cattle fair for a week. He was offering a bit of cash, free lodging, and all the peace and quiet I could ask for. It sounded like a win-win. The farmhouse was a charming, rustic 2-story with a wraparound porch and a stunning view of the pastures. I'd always liked coming here to visit. The horses were friendly, the air was crisp, and the nights were serene. Paul left me with a detailed list of chores: feeding the horses, mucking out stalls, and making sure the fences were intact. "And keep an eye on the house," he added casually. He reached into a cabinet and pulled out a small handgun, offering it to me. "You can keep this just in case," he said, holding it out. I'd never handled a gun before and wasn't comfortable with the idea of having one around. "Thanks, but I think I'll be fine," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'll just make sure everything's locked up tight." Paul nodded, but looked uncertain. "All right, just call the cops if anything feels off." I didn't think much of it at the time. A lot of farmers in the area dealt with trespassers or the occasional petty thief. I figured it was just some kids looking to cause trouble, or maybe someone after the expensive tools in the shed. Either way, I didn't feel worried. On the second night, as I was locking up the barn, I noticed something strange. The side gate to the horse pen was open. I distinctly remembered latching it earlier in the day. I dismissed it, thinking it was just my memory failing me. Still, it left me feeling unsettled. The following morning, I noticed something even stranger. A pile of hay near the barn had been disturbed, almost like someone had been lying there. Bits of straw were scattered, and the grass underneath was flattened. I figured it might have been an animal, but something about it didn't feel quite right. By the third night, that sense of something being wrong wouldn't let me rest. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was sitting in the living room reading a book. The quiet of the farmhouse was soothing, until I heard it. A faint creak came from upstairs, followed by another. At first, I thought it was just the house. Old farmhouses are known for their noises, after all. But then the creaks changed, sounding more like someone walking. My stomach knotted as I set the book down and listened. The steps moved slowly, as if someone was walking down the hall above me. I called out, "Jake? Is that you?" Grabbing a flashlight, I cautiously climbed the stairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. I reached the top and found the hallway empty. All the doors were closed, except one, the guest bedroom at the far end. It was ajar, the faintest sliver of darkness visible through the opening. Swallowing my unease, I pushed the door open. The room was as Jake had left it, but the bed was messy, and I just thought Jake hadn't made this bed before leaving. But something caught my eye. The closet door was open just a crack, enough for someone to be hiding inside. Summoning my courage, I swung the door wide open. The closet was empty, just clothes and a few old boxes. I felt foolish for letting my imagination get the better of me. The next morning, I found more signs of someone lurking around. The barn door latch was broken, hanging loosely by a single nail. Inside, the horses were restless, their ears twitching at every sound. One of them, Daisy, even refused to leave her stall. I decided to call Jake. "Hey, did you notice anything weird before you left? Like signs of someone sneaking around?" There was a pause before he answered. "I did, actually. A few weeks ago, I found footprints near the barn and some tools missing. That's why I asked you to stay there. I figured having someone around might scare off whoever it was." "You didn't think to tell me this before?" I snapped, my frustration clear. "I didn't think it was a big deal. Probably just some kids messing around," he replied. I wasn't convinced. That night, I double-checked every door and window, making sure they were locked. I even propped a chair under the doorknob in the kitchen for extra security. Satisfied, I settled into bed, hoping for an uneventful night. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to a dull thud against the wall of the house. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, a raccoon or maybe a bird that had flown into the siding. But then it happened again, louder, like something solid striking the wood. Groggy and confused, I sat up, listening. The house was silent. My pulse quickened as I got out of bed, quietly crossing the room to the window. The moonlight illuminated the yard below. As I reached the window, I froze. Outside, propped against the wall, was a ladder that hadn't been there earlier. That's when I saw a smudge on the glass, like someone had pressed their face against it, watching me. Someone had climbed up the ladder to peer into my bedroom. My hand trembled as I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. I shone the flashlight out the window, sweeping it across the yard and roofline. The ladder was empty now, but the smudge on the glass told me someone had been there. The thought of them crouching on the roof, staring at me while I slept, sent a wave of nausea through me. Determined to figure out what was going on, I grabbed a kitchen knife and started checking the house. As I reached the living room, I noticed the back door was slightly open, the chair I had propped under the knob lying on its side. Someone had been inside. My phone was in my pocket, and I immediately called the police. The operator assured me officers were on their way, but it would take at least 30 minutes. I didn't have 30 minutes. I went into the pantry to hide. From my hiding spot, I could hear them, 2 distinct sets of footsteps, moving through the house. They weren't in a hurry. Whoever they were searching. One of them spoke in a low voice. I couldn't make out the words. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer to the pantry. I tightened my grip on the knife, ready for the worst. Just as I thought they were about to find me, I heard the distant wail of a siren. The footsteps stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of hurried movements. I waited until I heard the front door slam. Peeking out, I saw the intruders sprinting across the yard toward the woods. The police entered moments later, sweeping the house and surrounding property. They found signs of forced entry on the back door and footprints leading into the woods, but no sign of the intruders. When Jake returned a few days later, I told him everything. He listened quietly, a look of guilt spreading across his face. "I had a feeling something was going on," he admitted. "That's why I asked you to stay here. I thought having someone around might scare them off." I couldn't believe it. "You used me as bait?" "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "I didn't think they'd actually show up." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me understood, but another part felt betrayed. I told Jake I wouldn't be staying at the farmhouse again, no matter how much he paid me. Even now, the memory of that night haunts me. Rural life has its charm, but it's easy to forget how vulnerable you are out there. No neighbors, no quick help, just you and the endless, quiet dark. Moving to the farm felt like a dream come true. I'd been working as a veterinary assistant in the city for years, but the long hours and constant noise had worn me down. When I saw the ad for a stay-in position helping an older couple manage their farm animals, I applied without hesitation. The pay wasn't amazing, but the chance to work with animals in a quiet, picturesque setting was too good to pass up. The farm was located just outside Winterset, Iowa, a small, quiet town surrounded by endless fields of corn and rolling hills. It was the kind of place that felt like stepping back in time. Charming, peaceful, and a far cry from the bustling city I'd left behind. The farm itself was beautiful. Rolling fields, a big red barn, and a quaint farmhouse, just like we see in the movies. The couple, Harold and June, were kind and welcoming, though they had an air of wariness about them, like they'd seen their fair share of hardship. They were both in their 70s, and while they could still manage most of the work, they needed help with the more physical tasks like cleaning the stables and feeding the larger animals. I settled into my small upstairs bedroom, which overlooked the pasture. The view was incredible, and the scent of fresh hay wafting through the open windows made it feel like I was in a different world. My first few days were blissful. I spent my mornings tending to the animals and my evenings reading or chatting with Harold and June over dinner. But as idyllic as it seemed, there was an odd atmosphere on the farm that I couldn't ignore. The strange feeling started on my fourth night. I'd just finished my nightly routine, brushing my teeth, checking on the animals one last time, and was curled up in bed with a book. The room was dimly lit by my bedside lamp. As I turned a page, I felt the oddest sensation, like I wasn't alone. It wasn't a sound or a movement, just an unshakable feeling that someone or something was near. I looked around the room, and my attention drifted to the window. That's when I saw the most terrifying sight of my life. A face, pale and emotionless, framed by the darkness outside. It was pressed close to the glass, the eyes staring directly at me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, and before I could react, the face was gone. I shot out of bed and ran to the window, yanking the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the dark expanse of the yard and the outline of the barn in the moonlight. My heart raced as I scanned the area for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. The next morning, I hesitated to bring it up to Harold and June. I didn't want to seem paranoid or ungrateful. But as we sat at the breakfast table, the image of that face wouldn't leave my mind. "Did either of you see anyone on the property last night?" I finally asked, trying to sound casual. "Maybe a neighbor or someone passing through?" June looked up from her tea with a puzzled expression. "No, dear. Why do you ask?" I hesitated, feeling a bit silly. "I thought I saw someone outside my window. Probably just my imagination." Harold chuckled. "Out here? Not likely. Nobody comes this far without a reason. It was probably just the shadows playing tricks on you." June nodded in agreement, but there was something in her eyes, something that made me think she wasn't entirely convinced. That afternoon, I decided to check outside my window, just to put my mind at ease. The ground below was soft from a recent rain, and to my horror, I found footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, leading from the edge of the woods to the spot right beneath my window. I stared at them for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. They were larger than mine, too large to belong to June, and Harold hadn't mentioned being out here. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my nerves frayed by every noise. That night, I locked my bedroom door and drew the curtains tightly, determined not to let my imagination get the better of me. The noises started a few nights later. I could hear a quiet rustling coming from outside the window, as like someone or something was moving through the grass. At first, I convinced myself it was probably just the wind or some random animal. I told Harold and June about the footprints and the noises, but they dismissed my concerns with the same reasoning as before. Shadows, animals, the natural sounds of the countryside. "You're not used to the quiet out here," Harold said with a kind smile. "It can play tricks on you." But I wasn't imagining it. I knew what I'd heard, and I knew what I'd seen. The second time I saw the face, it was even more terrifying. I was in the kitchen late one night, washing up after dinner, while Harold and June were already in bed. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I glanced up from the sink, and there it was, staring at me through the kitchen window. This time I screamed. The face disappeared instantly. My legs shook as I backed away from the sink, clutching the counter for support. Harold and June came rushing downstairs, alarmed by my outburst. "What's wrong?" June asked, her eyes wide with concern. "I saw it again," I stammered. "The face, it was right there, looking at me through the window." Harold checked the yard while June tried to calm me down, but as expected, they didn't find anything. "It must have been a trick of the light," Harold said again, but his voice lacked conviction this time. The final straw came 2 nights later. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were louder, circling the house. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight I kept by my bed. Gathering all the courage I had, I tiptoed to the window and carefully peered through the curtains. The yard was empty. I decided then and there that I couldn't stay. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going away, and I couldn't spend another night living in fear. I left the farm the next morning, making up an excuse about a family emergency. Harold and June seemed disappointed but understanding. As I loaded my car, June pulled me aside. "You're not the first to leave early," she said quietly, looking toward the woods. "Other workers have said similar things. Faces in the windows, strange noises at night. I don't know what it is, but it always seems to happen." I drove away, my emotions caught between feeling safe and still uneasy. Whatever was watching me on that farm, I hope I never see it again. If these farm horror stories made you think twice about rural life, hit that like button and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales. How would you handle finding footprints outside your door or a face in your window? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.